Jahawi Batoli, eco-filmmaker and wildlife specialist.
And I'm Melanie, co-founder of Kids Against Plastic and all-round animal lover.
Welcome to your weekly update on the health of our planet and its animals.
This is The Pulse.
Coming up in this week's episode.
There are signs that people are turning their backs on meat.
Great news from South Africa. The hunting of captive bred lions has been outlawed.
And stand by for some of the weird and wonderful eco-news stories that we've unearthed this week.
Hey Ella, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. It looks like a lovely setting there in Kenya.
It is a beautiful day here. But hey, it looks really quite nice where you are too.
Yeah, it makes a change to the usual Nottingham weather.
So, what's caught your eye in the news this week?
Well, as a vegan, a big news story for me this week has been a survey that's happened, and it showed that a quarter of meat eaters in the world are actually trying to reduce their consumption of meat. And the plant-based food market has actually increased by 10% too. So these are really great signs of people moving away from that kind of habit and diet.
I have to admit, I eat meat, but more and more now I'm also trying to lower the amount of meat, but also really try and see where I'm getting my meat from to make sure that it's coming from ethical sources. It's incredible to actually know and see the change that's happening with people in terms of trying to go for a more plant-based diet.
Yeah, and it's a really important change to be seeing because the meat-eating industry is actually really damaging for the planet. And Greenpeace actually said that the farming industry is one of the biggest causes of deforestation, which is really crazy and harmful to think about because of the amount of trees that are being cut down to make space for cattle farming and growth of soya. So this kind of change in people's diets and even just mindsets is really important to see.
You know, for so many people, it seems like such a distant problem because, you know, it could be happening half a world away. But really, we are all part of the problem if we're eating meat.
Yeah, so we're getting a report from conservationist Sam Zwicker from the Peruvian Amazon rainforest to show what frontline deforestation looks like.
This is about 30 hectares of cattle farm behind me. You can see cows for miles. This used to be pristine rainforest. So this one plot here has obviously heavily affected the species that used to live here. This one plot of land has made it so that the local biodiversity has decreased. But on the larger scale, you can picture 30 hectare plots like this are abundant. And so across this kind of landscape that used to be rainforest, you can imagine that there are a lot of animals that used to be able to call this place home that can no longer even cross this space. So this type of deforestation for cattle farming is growing. It's increasing at a grand scale, and it's encroaching upon pristine forests, more remote forests, especially our forests, like the Las Piedras region of Madre Dios, which is where we're standing right now. As the deforestation and the fragmentation increases, especially in these remote areas, it's even more important that we support conservation initiatives around the globe and that we address these socioeconomic drivers that are really causing these issues globally.
Thanks to Sam for that report. Now, Ella, I've come across some eco-news that I find quite bizarre. There are companies out there using bananas and pineapples to make fabrics that are actually making their way into the fashion industry.
Can you tell me more about how that works?
Well, there are these innovative companies that seem to be recycling these materials into fibers that can be made into things like shoes. Even to the point that Hugo Boss has released a line of shoes made from pineapple leather. That's
really interesting because I came across a similar story actually, which is shoes made from grapes, which is a similar idea, and it's by a company called Minuit sur Terre in France, and they're the first fashion brand to use this material.
I mean, these are definitely the most ecological alternatives to leather. And not only leather, because the fashion industry uses lots of plastic, so the move to try and find more eco-friendly materials is huge.
As COP26 approaches, we're starting to see a lot more environmental stories in the news.
We are. So COP26, for those who don't know, is the annual UN conference on climate change, where all the world leaders come together to discuss issues surrounding our climate.
And it's really exciting this year because it's in my part of the world, in Glasgow in Scotland. And a story that really caught my eye surrounding COP was that poorer countries are calling to end smoke and mirrors of richer countries, making dedications and promises and not following through.
You know, coming from a developing country myself, we see the effects of climate change firsthand. And I mean, Kenya, they say that we're going to have one of the worst droughts coming up this year, and that is because of climate change. So these things need to be tackled.
And it's really important that we do make sure this action that's spoken about happens. And I'll actually be in Glasgow for the conference reporting for Pulse.
Take a look at this clip.
Oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. Where did you come from?
Poor sea lion, but it looks like it had a bit of a lucky escape.
Yeah, you know, orcas are the ultimate apex predator in the marine environment, so a sea lion like that would make a lovely mouthful. So that is one lucky sea lion. There's been some great news from South Africa. The practice of canned hunting has been outlawed.
Well, that's incredible news.
I mean, incredibly more so for lions as well, because canned hunting is basically the practice of raising wild animals, and they're bred just to be shot. And there's been a number of organizations that have been working tirelessly to end this practice, including the Born Free Foundation.
Free, where no walls divide you. You're free as a roaring tide, so there's no need to hide.
It's such a powerful animation. Will Travers is the president of the Born Free Foundation. Will, what's your reaction to the decision to end canned hunting?
Well, Ella, I am hugely encouraged because we've been working on this at Born Free, along with partners like Blood Lions and Humane Society International for many, many years. And actually, I never kind of thought it would reach this point.
Yeah, it's really great, but I imagine the next steps aren't going to be straightforward.
Ella, it is not at all straightforward. Today, there are approximately 300 facilities and as many as 12,000 big cats, including tigers, including leopards, in those facilities. And what are the options that we have? Well, some lucky ones, a very few, may go to sanctuaries, good sanctuaries. Born Free has sanctuaries down in the Eastern Cape of South Africa where we look after a handful of lucky big cats. Some will have to stay where they are, and the whole facility will have to be repurposed. Instead of exploiting animals, it will become a bit like a retirement home, but it will need inspection and it will need money, and since the owner is not going to be making any money because he's no longer exploiting those animals, money's going to have to come from government, I suspect. And very sadly, because of all sorts of health and mental welfare problems that I've seen in some of those big cats, some will have to be put to sleep. And it's, you know, it's a tragedy that that's going to have to happen. But having seen their suffering, I think it is the humane thing for some of those animals. It is really difficult, it is really complex. I hope that as many can live out a good life as possible.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Will.
I have a bit of a feel-good story for you. Now, this little furry marsupial called a bandicoot in Australia has been brought back from the brink of extinction. After 30 years of hard work, they've managed to go from 150 individuals up to 1,500. So that's a really good story to show you that we can bring back animals.
That is really positive news to be hearing, and it actually links pretty well with a story a bit closer to home here in the UK, and that's about beavers. So beavers have been extinct in the UK for about 400 years after being hunted for their fur and their glands. But thanks to the help of organisations like Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, which is actually in the East Midlands near me, they're starting to be reintroduced again, so that's really great to be hearing.
You know, the world needs more positive stories like this because it goes to show that if we put our minds to something, we can make a change. And that's it from us here this week. We'll see you all again.
Bye!
Hi Jahawi, looks like a very nice warm day for you there.
Hey, Ella. Yeah, it's actually a scorching day over here in Lamu. How are things with you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm pretty freezing though. So what's caught your eye in the news this week?
For me, the most exciting news has been the announcement of the Earthshot Prize winners. Now, for those of you who don't know it, this has been a prize that was set up by Prince William to honor people and organizations that are working hard to save the planet. And they each get £1 million to further their work.
Yeah, it's a really cool idea for an award. There were so many incredible people and projects there. So who really stood out for you?
For me, it has to be Coral Vita. These are two best friends who came together to set up a coral regrowing project in the Bahamas and have been using some incredible science behind it to speed up regrowth.
Well, that's an incredible idea because coral reefs are hugely important, being at the bottom of the food chain and also providing shelter and habitats for loads of different types of fish and animals. And I actually read a report from One Earth scientific journal that said coral reefs have been down 50% compared to in the 1950s, which is really shocking.
That is a really scary statistic. And you know what? It's not only the environment, because it's also the communities that rely on coral reefs, mainly local and indigenous along the coast, who get their sustenance from them. So earlier, I got to speak to prize winner Sam Tyker from Coral Vita to learn more about their exciting project. Firstly, a massive congratulations on winning the award.
Thanks for having me on, Jahawi. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you explain the significance of what you do?
The bulk of our work is focused on the fragmentation of corals. If you take one piece of coral, cut it up into all these little micro fragments, and you place them near each other, it triggers a healing process, almost like scar tissue. And then the corals will fuse back into themselves. And so instead of a brain coral growing from a coin to a dinner plate in decades, if not centuries, we can grow a brain coral to that size in a matter of months or years. We then also use methods from within assisted evolution. So being able to strengthen corals' resilience to climate change threats is really important. So growing the corals on land, unlike traditional underwater ocean-based farms, gives us a number of key advantages, including we control the growing conditions. There's a number of different ways you can affix corals to the reefs, but the main way is you go down with underwater drills, affix the corals to the rock or whatever substrate you're working with. Coral starts growing and the reef starts coming back to life.
Wow. So it must really not surprise you to hear this report that came out that said that since the 1950s, we've lost about half of the world's corals.
Not surprising, but still heartbreaking. It's tragic to see this incredible ecosystem disappearing in front of our eyes. And I've been a diver since I was 13. This is something that really matters to me on a personal level. Not to mention that's critically important for the billion people around the world who depend on reefs for their livelihoods, for food security, for shelter from storms.
It's a really sobering thought. Tell me, what do you think the future holds for coral reefs and for Coral Vita?
I'll be the first person to say my job shouldn't exist. We can protect coral reefs so we don't need to restore them. So for our future Coral Vita, we currently have our first coral farm operating in Grand Bahama. Our ultimate vision is we want large-scale land-based coral farms working in every nation with reefs around the world.
Well, thank you, Sam. You're doing incredible work, and I really look forward to seeing how your project grows in the future.
I actually came across this really amazing video. Just take a look. It shows an elephant confronting a local bus in Kannur in South India. And this is because the road runs through this really dense forest that's home to loads of wild animals like elephants.
Wow. And it just shows you the power of elephant. Here in Africa, habitat loss is actually the leading cause of human-wildlife conflict, especially with elephant.
Yeah, but it's all about just respecting that it is their habitats that you're going across and avoiding them as much as you can, staying out of their way.
I completely agree. As much as humans need space, also all our important megafauna need their space to be able to coexist together.
Something in the news that I found really interesting and actually pretty shocking was that our pets have double the carbon footprint of that of a Toyota Land Cruiser car.
That's a crazy statistic. I mean, I have a Land Cruiser and I can't even imagine how my dog has more emissions than that.
Actually, it's because of their diets and what we feed them. Loads of dogs are overweight and it's mainly due to the amount of meat that we're feeding them. And as lots of people know now, beef that we're feeding our dogs has a huge environmental impact.
Yeah, I mean, Ella, I've come from a family where growing up we've been surrounded by dogs. But now I'm starting to think that it's much better just to go for one.
Yeah, absolutely. There are things that we can all be doing in our own lives to help. Like with Griff here, we're going to try feeding him dog food made from insects and reduce his meat intake. So there's a few things that we can all try out to try and help.
Ella, have a look at this.
Oh, wow.
So this guy is a real character. He's called Benjamin Von Wong, and he's an artist and environmental activist from Canada. And he's come up with an installation called Turn Off the Plastic Tap, where he is trying to highlight how it's actually the production of plastic that we need to tackle because it's not slowing down. So he's gone and done these incredible installations to try and bring our attention to try and stop the production of plastic.
Yeah, that's so cool. And whereabouts are the installations?
So he first did the installation in 5 places across Canada. And each place represented an aspect of plastic that he's trying to focus on. So for example, he did one installation at a beach, highlighting how we're choking the oceans full of plastic. He did another installation at a landfill to show that even if we throw away plastic, it hasn't really gone away. And he also did an installation in a kid's playground to just highlight the fact that we're leaving the future generations with all this plastic. Now the installation is up in Paris, in France.
Actually, Howie, I coincidentally found a pretty similar story. There's a tunnel made from plastic in Indonesia, and it's all collected from a local river to the city of Surabaya. It was made by environmental activists from a group called Ecoturn, and it's all about highlighting the conditions of the local river and how bad they are with all the plastic in them.
It's incredible to see that around the world, so many people are talking about plastic pollution, but also talking about how we can stop it.
So, Howie, in the UK, a new sustainable aviation fuel has just been announced, and EasyJet are actually using a mixture of biofuel and normal jet fuel for some of their flights. But I'm really struggling to think, is this actually sustainable?
They actually do use a combination of, old cooking fats and sometimes fat from animals. So I think that's a fantastic step that all the other airlines should take.
Compared to the normal fossil jet fuels, it releases 80% less greenhouse gases, but at the moment, people are needing to use a mixture of this biofuel as well as normal jet fuel.
I think as amazing as these new technologies are, it will still take a bit of time before they can really become mainstream and we can see the impact. And as of now, we should actually still just be reducing the amount we fly.
Yeah, absolutely. Aviation is a massive polluter, so just using different types of fuel won't fully solve the issue.
So, to continue our theme of eco-travel, I came across this article about a German company that is developing the tech to have tarmac that wirelessly charges your electric car as you drive.
What? That's insane. How does that work?
So this German company is called Magment, and they've figured out a way to sort of incorporate these magnetic particles within the concrete so that it can conduct a charge which then wirelessly transfers the energy to your car, much like you have your wireless charging on your phone.
Would that mean that you wouldn't have to wait for your car to charge at a service station when you're driving?
Theoretically, it would mean that, yes, you can actually just drive and your car is constantly being recharged. And it could be revolutionary. In Indiana, they're actually going to try and make a test road to see just how viable it is.
Another really positive development that I found that's in the food industry is that McDonald's are making a McPlant burger in the UK and the US. So this would be using Beyond Meat, which is a meat-free alternative that's made from potatoes, peas and rice. And I can tell you, as a vegan family, it's definitely one of our favourite alternatives. It's really amazing to see more of these plant-based alternatives even in fast food chains now, which is really exciting. And I know I'm definitely going to try it at some point. Would you be willing to try it, Jahawi?
I'm not vegan, but I'd be definitely happy to try, because anything that goes towards saving this world, bringing down our CO2 emissions, I think is a positive step forward. But you know what? There isn't even a McDonald's in Kenya.
Oh wow, that's really surprising.
You know, in the developing world, most of the people are actually on plant-based diets mainly. And meat is something that you have at special occasions. And maybe if we all looked at meat that way as something for special occasions, we could cut down meat consumption greatly.
Yeah, that's a lot more sustainable. And that's about it for this week, but these are all topics that will be coming up at the annual UN COP26 Climate Conference, which I'll actually be reporting from in Glasgow next time.
Amazing. I look forward to hearing what you make of that.
Bye.
Bye. Hey Ella, how are you doing?
Hi Jahawi, I'm good. A wee bit chilly.
Yeah, you're a little bit further north than usual.
Yes, this week I'm reporting from Glasgow in Scotland because that's where the 2021 COP26 United Nations Climate Change Conference is being held. So that's where all of the world leaders come together to discuss the most effective ways to tackle the climate crisis.
Yeah, it really is crunch time for these world leaders to come and agree on action.
Yeah, absolutely. And the British Prime Minister has actually agreed to bring along a Sky TV documentary to show all of the other leaders. It's called In Your Hands, and it shows the perspectives of 6 young people from all around the world and showing the effects of the climate crisis near them.
Your future depends upon the future of the planet, but only if we all work hard now to make our planet healthy again will your future be healthy too.
Indonesia's capital city is gradually sinking. This is the seawall that the authorities have put up. On this side of the wall is Jakarta, and on the other side of it, well, let's take a look. A mosque, now submerged under the rising waters. A place where people used to pray, now abandoned because of the damage we've done to our environment.
My beloved boreal forest is being destroyed by the world's largest industrial project. If we continue to take oil out of our earth and put it into the atmosphere, then we're not going to have an earth anymore.
My message to world leaders is for them to make sure every child has access to education so that they can learn about the importance of preserving not just human life, but the animals we share our planet with. And then we can beat climate change.
Our planet needs saving. Are you listening?
Are you listening?
Wow, that was a really powerful message. So Ella, tell me, what are these leaders trying to achieve?
Well, one of the first goals that are being discussed is net zero emissions by 2050, which basically means balancing the amount of greenhouse gases that are being produced and the amount of greenhouse gases that are being removed from the atmosphere through natural means or through the new technological advances. And this should help to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees.
I was particularly interested in goal number 2, which is about the protection and restoration of ecosystems. And I was moved by Sir David Attenborough's speech.
Nature has been there for us when we needed it the most. Yet we have allowed our natural world and climate to reach breaking point. As the climate emergency intensifies, the threat to life on Earth becomes ever greater. But we have the choice of a better and wilder future. A future where wildlife thrives alongside people. A future where nature helps us in the fight against climate change. Nature has extraordinary powers to lock up carbon dioxide, to provide clean air and water, to help protect us from flooding and extreme weather, and to provide the food which sustains us. It's not too late to win the fight against the climate and nature crises. Given the chance, nature can recover in the most remarkable ways.
Something that I'm super proud of at COP26 is a life-size Formula E car built by Envision Racing that's made from plastic collected by school children in Glasgow and plastic used by my family.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, is that the car that I saw world leaders having their pictures taken with?
Yeah, the car has been on display at COP to raise awareness of the issue of single-use plastic. And it's a collaboration with my sister and my charity, Kids Against Plastic, and the Formula E team, Envision Racing.
Single-use plastic is such a big issue. Here in Kenya, they banned single-use plastic bags from supermarkets a few years ago, and actually, right behind me is a marine park, and now you actually can't go in there with any single-use plastics.
Wow, that's very impressive and just the kind of initiative we need to be seeing a lot more.
So Ella, what are the main messages coming out of COP26 so far?
Well, over 100 nations, including Brazil, have committed to ending deforestation by 2030. This is super important because it's estimated that the equivalent of 2 to 3 football pitches are being lost every minute in the Amazon.
Another way of putting that into perspective is that since the 1970s, they estimate that an area the size of Texas has been lost in the Amazon. I mean, that's bigger than Kenya.
It's just shocking.
Yeah, it really is.
There's also been more positive news, and it's that world leaders have dedicated to reducing methane emissions by 30%, also by 2030.
Yeah, that's really important because I know we all focus on CO2, but methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases. And it's thought that pound for pound, it has 25 more times the warming potential than carbon dioxide. And it's also released in a lot of the things we do. It comes from industry, it comes from livestock, and it can even come from landfills. So bringing this down is hugely important.
Yeah, exactly. And to discuss the importance of these developments, I caught up with Sophie Gagan from the Environmental Investigation Agency. Hi Sophie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So what are your thoughts on the commitments from 100 nations to end deforestation by 2030?
I think it's great to see the number and breadth of countries that have signed up. But obviously, we need to see every single country who's signed up follow through with concrete action. We need to see measures put in place for good governance and for the protection of forests, but also the protection of the human rights and land rights of the Indigenous people.
Another thing we've seen come out of COP is world leaders committing to reducing methane emissions by 30%, also by 2030. Do you think that this is achievable?
Absolutely. But not just achievable, relatively easy to do. But again, like the Deforestation Pledge, this is just a pledge. And so we need to see this followed up with an international framework with legally binding methane emission reductions as well.
When will we know if COP26 has been a success?
I'm not sure. I think we will see what happens with the financing negotiations. And depending on that, that will have a huge indication of whether we can fund all of these lofty ambitions that we've talked about.
And we look forward to hearing about the conclusions from the conference in the next episode. Take a look at this.
Is that a leopard?
Yes, in Western India, a leopard fell into a well, so Wildlife SOS, the Forest Service and the locals came together to rescue it. Now in the clip you can see that the locals had already lowered down a bench, so then Wildlife SOS came in with a trap and they slowly lowered it down and the leopard just jumped straight in.
Oh wow!
Now after 2 days of monitoring the leopard to make sure that it was healthy, this leopard was released back into the wild.
Oh, that's amazing to hear, and it's great to see all of the locals helping out. But it just highlights this issue of urbanisation and how it's causing more interactions with wild animals and humans, and it's not always for the best.
The problem is so widespread that only last year, Wildlife SOS carried out 10,000 rescues. So that shows just how big of a problem this is. So there's something else that caught my eye this week, and it actually comes from your part of the world, Ella. Marwell Zoo, which is a zoo on the south coast of England, is potentially the first zoo of its kind to actually produce renewable energy from animal waste.
What a great idea. It's just the kind of thing people here at COP26 would love. So how does it work?
So what they do is they collect the animal waste and then they dry it to make briquettes. The briquettes are then fed into a boiler which heats water for their new tropical animal enclosure. So it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's great to see these innovative ideas and ways of getting renewable energy locally. Now for the latest in a long battle to free an elephant called Billy. Billy has been in Los Angeles Zoo in California since he was forcibly removed from his home in Malaysia in 1989.
Wow, to be taken out of the wild and held in captivity for so long is tragic.
But it's great to see that people are still campaigning for Billy, and young people are included in that. 13-year-old Robin is among those who are campaigning for Billy to be moved to an animal sanctuary. We asked her to file a special report for The Pulse.
Billy is an Asian bull elephant, and this is how he spends his day. Almost always alone, rocking endlessly in his boredom, just as he's done for more than 30 years in captivity. The zoo claims it means he's happy, just looking forward to his food, but many animal experts disagree.
We never see stereotypic behavior in the wild. None of that head bobbing that Billy does. You just don't see that in the wild, ever.
Campaigners have been trying to free Billy since before I was born, and I'm so glad to see that they are not giving up.
Where the elephants roam.
I think it's important the zoo knows how many young people are against keeping Billy in a small space. So I spoke out myself at the rally.
I would rather Billy be as happy as possible than for kids like me to get to stare at him. We're smart enough to learn about elephants in other ways.
What bothers me most is that Billy was brought here from his home in Malaysia when he was just 4 years old. And this video shows that he was then cruelly trained to do tricks for visitors at the zoo.
And you'll see him start to lay himself down. Come on down. When he gets that knee down, what I'll do is get this foot under him, which he's doing already, and that ensures that he comes this way and doesn't try to lie the other way. Steady.
There's a sign just outside of Billy's enclosure saying, "In zoos, males are often by themselves because that's how they would live in the wild." But again, elephant experts told us this just is not true most of the time.
Male elephants are not on their own in the wild, except for, short periods of time.
The zoo refused our request for an interview, but I hope that they finally listen and let Billy go into a sanctuary where he can have so much more room and live much more like he would in his home in the wild. This is Robin in Los Angeles.
I mean, that is a pretty shocking report. Coming from Africa, where we have our big megafauna that roams free, to see something like that is really hard.
Well, for more on Billy's story and how you can help, check out EcoFlix's landmark documentary, Free Billy, on the EcoFlix platform now.
So, Ella, we can't finish today's show without hearing about the amazing award you and your sister Amy just won.
Oh, we don't have to.
Yes, we do. It's called the Pride of Britain Award. It's quite an accolade, isn't it?
Yeah, the Pride of Britain Awards recognise the achievements of everyday people, so my sister and I won the new category called Environmental Champions for our work with Kids Against Plastic.
Amazing. Congratulations, Ella. That's so well deserved. And a little birdie told me that you may have the trophy there with you.
Thank you, and yes, I do have it with me, but actually I think we're about done for this week, so we'll see you next time.
All right then, we won't embarrass you anymore. See you next week.
Bye.
Hey Ella, so I see you're back home after COP26.
Hi Joey, yeah, I'm back in Nottingham after what was a very exciting few days in Scotland for the climate conference.
Yeah, it seemed like everyone was there. I mean, from Greta Thunberg to Barack Obama.
Yeah, so many world leaders and passionate young activists. There was definitely a real atmosphere.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to COP.
If working apart, we are a force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, surely working together, we are powerful enough to save it.
System change, not climate change. System change, not climate change. We don't want your blood, boy.
The leaders are not doing nothing. They are actively creating loopholes and shaping frameworks to benefit themselves.
I believe we can secure a better future. We have to.
That's a great snapshot of what COP26 was like. There was so much going on.
And something that caught my eye is developed nations have again committed to supporting developing nations financially with the effects of climate change. But this announcement has been met with quite a bit of skepticism.
Yeah, and I think rightly so, because this financial support should have already been provided to these developing countries.
While developed nations kind of squabble over who's funding what and how it's all going to work, the poorest countries on Earth are actually feeling the effects of climate change as we speak. Here in Kenya, we have been battling drought. We've had floods in the last couple of years. So people here are on the front line of these changes.
Another worrying thing that I saw from COP26 was Climate Analysis Tracker, which is the world's most respected climate analysis coalition, who said that with the outcome of COP26, we're on target for a temperature increase of 2.4 degrees Celsius. And this would have pretty disastrous impacts with loads of sea level rising, flooding, droughts, and lots of really intense storms.
Yeah, even a 1.5 degree increase in global temperatures means that anywhere between 70 to 90% of the world's remaining coral reefs are at threat of bleaching. And a 2 degrees rise could mean that we could lose 90% of our reefs.
Yeah, so while there have been some good outcomes from COP, there's a lot of varying reactions to how it's gone. So I've spoken to Katie White, the Executive Director of WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, to see what she thinks about the outcome. Hi Katie, thanks for joining me today.
Hi Ella, great to be here.
So what are the disappointments from COP26?
I think there's two truths. One is we are in a better position than we have ever been before, and there is more action and effort and commitment on the table. That's good news. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. There is still a gap between what we need to do to keep that crucial 1.5 alive and what is on the table.
And what have the positives of COP26 been, in your opinion?
There's been, good commitment in terms of, for us at WWF, there was a lot of focus on forests. We won't meet 1.5 degrees if we don't tackle deforestation and restore our nature. And so nature has to be part of this discussion. It's a key part of nature, and it hasn't been to date. So we're really pleased that that was up there on the agenda. Again, more to do, of course, and the key is going to be in the delivery.
And is there anything you think should have been discussed at COP that wasn't?
So for WWF, we'd like more of a focus on food, because for us, food is at the heart of the climate and biodiversity crisis. It's 30% of greenhouse gases, 60% of biodiversity loss is caused by the food sector. So that's one sector that really hasn't yet stepped up in terms of reducing its emissions, but also that crucial nature restoration. So in the years to come, we'll be looking for more action, commitments and policies to deliver on that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for speaking to me, Katie.
It was my pleasure, Ella. Great to chat with you.
Take a look at this pretty crazy clip.
Whoa, what's going on?
Well, this is somewhere in the Bahamas, and it looks like a shark has been caught in a makeshift net next to a pier. And this fearless young man has jumped in the water to rescue the shark. I mean, he picks it up, takes it on land, frees it, and returns it back into the sea.
Oh wow, that's quite brave. Is that a problem where you are, Jahawi?
I can't say I've ever really seen that in this part of the world. I mean, it's important actually to stress that this is incredibly dangerous, both for the shark and for the man. So you really need to actually know what you're doing before you go in the water with predators. And sometimes this is best left to local fishery authorities who can maybe come in with scientists and help free the animal safely. Continuing with our ocean theme in this episode, there's been some incredible news to come out of Cape Verde. Now, the Environmental Ministry puts the number of loggerhead turtle nests last year at around 200,000. And that's up from about 11,000 in the year 2015.
Yeah, that is an absolutely incredible increase because they were very endangered, weren't they? So how did they actually manage to bounce back?
You know, the recovery of sea turtles is one of those incredible stories because pretty much all around the world, and especially in developing countries, turtles were eaten for their meat. So through conservation efforts and education efforts, but also as developing countries have kind of progressed and people can afford different kinds of protein, turtle numbers have really rebounded.
And interestingly, I actually saw that beaches from India to the US have also seen increases in the amount of nest numbers, but it wasn't all just positive news that I saw.
You know, the problem is we're all feeling the effects of global temperature rise. So when it comes to turtles, it's important to remember that the temperature of the sand actually dictates the sex of the turtle. So if the sand is a bit warmer, those turtles become female. And actually, in the island of Mayo a couple of years ago, they estimated that almost 100% of the hatchlings were female. And this is something that's been seen in Australia as well. So that's incredibly worrying for the gene pool for these turtles.
Something that I've been really mesmerised by is pictures from a volcano in La Palma, which is one of the Canary Islands. And it's been erupting for about 2 months now, which is insane.
I mean, just looking at these pictures, you can see just how powerful and raw and how much energy this volcano has.
Yeah, it's really beautiful despite how dangerous it is. The lava is about 1,300 degrees Celsius, and it's caused over 2,500 homes to be burned down and 7,000 locals have had to be evacuated.
I know, it's great news that there have been no fatalities.
But there's no scientific data to say that it's even going to stop anytime soon either, which shows how powerful nature really is.
So Ella, there's been some great news out of West Africa for chimpanzees. A landmark action plan was launched, published by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature.
Well, that is really amazing news to be hearing, because in 2016, Western chimpanzees were listed on the IUCN Red List as critically endangered, which is just the step before extinction.
Yeah, having protection for them is incredibly important because only 17% of the chimpanzee population reside within national parks and protected areas, leaving 83% outside of these protected areas and vulnerable. Now, Liberia is said to hold the largest population of Western chimpanzees. And earlier today, I got to talk to Jenny Desmond, who founded the Liberia Chimpanzee Rescue and Protection. Hi, Jenny. Thanks for joining us. Now, in a sentence, can you explain to us the plight of the Western chimpanzee?
Western chimpanzees are faced by a variety of threats, but that includes habitat loss, encroachment into their habitat, disease risk, and the illegal bushmeat and pet trades are really the most prevalent threats that facing chimpanzees in West Africa.
So how happy are you to hear about this action plan to save chimpanzees in West Africa?
We're very, very excited about it. It's essential, actually outlines very critical concrete steps that we all need to take to save the species. It involves the eight range countries, so the countries where Western chimpanzees still exist in the wild. And it's going to become the first time that all of these 8 countries in the entire region, different languages, different cultures, different threats and challenges that we all face are all going to come together in a really cohesive and comprehensive way to protect and conserve chimpanzees.
What difference will this make for the chimpanzees in West Africa?
Gosh, I mean, I'm an optimist. I'm a realist, but I'm an optimist. And I hope that I am having the same conversation with you in 10 years and we are not getting chimpanzees into our rescue centers anymore. They're all staying in the wild and the numbers increase drastically. And we're looking at a beautiful, robust, vibrant population of Western chimpanzees throughout all of the range countries.
This week saw the launch of the first TV channel for dogs, which was very fittingly named Dog TV.
How does that work? I mean, I've tried to get my dogs to watch TV and they're never interested.
Well, this would be a bit different because this is supposedly scientifically tested programming, which is hoping to help ease stress and separation anxiety for your dog if they're left alone.
Wow. But you know, that's not the craziest bit of news I've heard this week, because in New Zealand, a bat managed to win a Bird of the Year competition.
What? How did that work? I swear bats are a mammal, not a bird.
Yeah, so in New Zealand, you've got what's called the peka peka long-tailed bat, and it's an endemic bat that not many people know exists. So the Forest and Bird Society of New Zealand decided to enter it into their Bird of the Year competition to get people to understand that they have this bat and that it's also endangered from habitat loss and from introduced threats. So there you have it. It won by 3,000 votes.
I mean, even if it maybe shouldn't have been included, I'm glad it was, because bats are very cute and, like all animals, super important. So I'm glad it's raising awareness of them.
Yeah, it is all a bit batty, but all for a good cause.
Oh, I think we're done for this week. See you next time.
Bye. Hey, Ella.
Hi, Jahawi. I'm very jealous of the weather you've got there once again.
Well, you know, it's lovely in the shade, but if you step out into the sunshine, it is so hot.
Maybe a bit too hot. We need a compromise. So Jahawi, a story that I found really interesting that I think we should start this week's show with is that India is said to be the world's biggest polluter of CO2 emissions because of crop waste and agricultural activities. So the report says that India is said to have released 5 billion tonnes of CO2 emissions between 2015 and 2020 alone. And this is about 1 billion tonnes a year, which is 3% of total global average CO2 emissions.
I mean, that's a staggering figure. What exactly is, burning of agricultural waste?
So at the end of a harvest, the farmers are left with lots of crop residue and waste, and the best way to deal with this problem, and the cheapest and easiest way, is really just to burn it. Luckily, lots of people are coming up with alternative ways of how to deal with this waste. And one of the people who have come up with an alternative is Earthshot Prize winners Takachar. So just take a look at this short clip that explains all about their invention.
My name is Vidyut and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Takachar. Takachar has a mission to fight climate change by drastically scaling the utilization of waste agricultural residue. Worldwide, more than $120 billion worth of waste like paddy straw, coconut shells, rice husk, sugarcane trash is burnt in the open, which otherwise could have been used productively. So this is how our process works. You take any kind of agricultural residue like coconut shells, and those are fed into the machine. It undergoes oxygen lean torrefaction, which is essentially heating the biomass between 200 and 350 degrees Celsius. Once the conversion has happened, it is conveyed and cooled, and the end product comes out in a carbon-rich, dense form. It's then suitable to be used as a raw material to make various products like fuels, fertilizers, and chemicals like activated carbon.
I spoke to Kevin, CTO and founder of Takachar, to find out more. Hi Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Congratulations for your Earthshot Prize win.
Winning Earthshot Prize was a big surprise to us, but we are very much honored and humbled by it.
What stage of development is Takachar at now?
Right now we're in prototyping stage, so we have a few prototypes, some small, some larger, scaled up, deployed in the field. And right now we work with around 5,000 farmers.
So what are the next steps for you?
Yeah, and I think for us and for the Royal Foundation too, I think both of us would like to see the solution scaled and its impact accelerated.
Thanks so much, Kevin. So Jahawi, something that I was really shocked by was this video. Just take a look.
Wow. I mean, that is a crazy clip. I mean, look at just how that hippo is basically erupting out of the water.
Yeah, I know. It's keeping up with a speedboat in Zambia. And at first I was a bit skeptical about if the clip was actually real because I knew hippos could move quickly, but I didn't realize they were that fast.
What a lot of people don't realize is hippos don't actually swim. They run along the bottom. This hippo is literally running along the floor of the river and jumping up, and it's exerting itself so much that it's having to come up for air so much.
When you see it chasing the speedboat, what I'm thinking is I would not want to be in a race with a hippo.
Yeah, well, you know, hippos are some of the most dangerous animals here in Africa, and they're responsible for quite a number of deaths. I mean, they can grow up to 2 tons and outrun a human at over 50 kilometers an hour. So it's really best to stay away from them. You know, I'm a passionate photographer, so I was super excited to see the winners of this year's Environmental Photographer of the Year Awards.
Oh yeah, I was reading about that. It was really cool. Over 7,000 images from 120 nations that were submitted to the 8 categories. And they're all about telling the story of the climate crisis and the people who are working to raise awareness of it.
So, the categories were all won by incredible images. My favorite photograph won the Climate Action category, and it's a photograph entitled The Last Breath. And it's a really poignant photograph taken by Kenyan photographer Kevin Ochengonyango. And earlier, I got to speak to him about this photograph. Hi, Kevin. Firstly, a huge congratulations on winning the award.
Thank you, Jahawi. Yeah, I'm very privileged to have won the 40 Climate Action Award.
So, Can you tell me a little more about the concept behind this photograph?
Okay, the image itself is titled The Last Breath. Yeah, it shows a young boy taking in air from a plant. And so this is just to show what is to come if we keep on pushing nature to its core.
What motivated you to make this photograph?
Where I come from in Nairobi, Dandora, yeah, we have like this very huge dump site. It's like acres and acres of land. It's called Dandora dump site. It is really taking a toll on pollution here. It's very polluted here. So I decided to speak out on the issue of how did we get to here? How did we get to acres of land being a landfill?
So what did you want people to think when they see this picture?
I want people to think of, not of us, people to think of the younger generation, our grandkids, our kids, how they will survive while we are constantly cutting down the trees, when we are constantly polluting the air with fossil fuels.
So, Jahawi, can you guess what that is?
No. And I'm not going to hazard a guess, actually.
Yeah, I was a bit confused when I first saw it too, but it's actually a bladeless wind turbine. And the way it works is that the cylinder vibrates in the wind, the vibrations are then harnessed by an alternator, and then they're turned into electricity.
Wow, that's such a clever idea. I mean, having no blades is actually great for wildlife because birds get caught up into the blades, and so having one without blades sounds pretty cool to me.
Yeah, there can be some really positive outcomes from having these, because not only is it better for the environment, like you just mentioned, it can fit into smaller spaces, so you can have more of them in a certain area, or they can even fit into small areas like your back garden.
Well, having one in your backyard may draw some strange stares from your neighbours, but you know what? It's all for a good cause.
Yeah, and I think our neighbours are kind of used to our environmental projects in our garden by now, so we might have to invest in one.
So, there's some really positive news coming out of Nepal. After a 10-year conservation effort in the Chitwan National Park, tiger numbers have almost doubled to 240 individuals.
Oh, that's amazing news. I mean, it's still a very low number because tigers are very, very endangered. In fact, the WWF estimate that globally there are about 3,900 tigers left in the wild, and that's it.
There are 13 countries in Asia that have wild tigers, and Nepal is one of them. And these countries came together to actually pledge a doubling in numbers by 2022. And Nepal is the only country that is on track to actually achieving this pledge.
What is it that Nepal's doing that can be replicated?
Well, there is severe punishment for poachers. And on top of that, they have heavily armed guards who do regular patrols of these areas and a lot of community outreach.
Oh, that's amazing then. Are there any problems that the tigers are still facing?
Well, you know, they're actually kind of a victim of their own success because all of a sudden you've got this increase in tiger numbers, but not an increase in space. So that's putting them in conflict with each other. And to top it all off, you've got the human-wildlife conflict issue on the outside, which is putting pressure on them.
I did actually hear that the park is aiming to expand, so hopefully that can solve the problem of overpopulation a bit.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not sure if I've mentioned Jahawi, but I'm actually vegan.
Yes, you have mentioned it.
Just a few times. But I do love seeing vegan alternatives in the news more and more. And something that I was really impressed with this week was celebrity chef Marco Pierre White actually introducing 3D printed steaks into his restaurants.
Did you just say 3D printed steaks?
Yeah.
I mean, I would think of 3D printing for plastics, but what's inside a 3D printed steak?
It's made from plant-based alternatives, but they don't actually say what, and they don't really say how it's made either, so I'd really like to know more about what is inside it.
Now, I have my own vegan substitute story as well, and it's actually from a company called Kuleana, and they're making vegan substitute tuna. They use a combination of radish, bamboo, algae, to create this tuna that is apparently super healthy for you, but without all the mercury and all the heavy metals that come with wild-caught tuna.
It's really good to see all of these alternatives. It's very different to when I first went vegan and there was hardly anything, just alternatives to cheese that weren't very nice.
So, tune in again next week for more vegan recipes.
This is not going to be an every week thing now. We're not just going to end it with bad jokes every time, Jahawi.
And on that note, bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey Ella, aside from looking rather cold, how are you doing?
Hi Jahawi, yeah, just a little bit. No, I'm good, thank you. I've been busy with school and essays and that kind of thing. So what's caught your eye in the news this week?
The winners of the International Children's Peace Prize have been announced, and it's been won by these two young brothers from India, Vihan and Nav Agarwal, a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, who have set up this incredible initiative called One Step Greener. They go through segregating trash and collecting it from homes and taking it to recycling facilities. And what started with 15 households has now grown to over 1,000 in Delhi and Gurugram.
Oh wow, what a great idea that is, because India does have a massive waste problem. In fact, all of the major cities are said to have these things called rubbish mountains, which can be up to 18 stories high. So there's definitely a solution that's needed for this waste problem in India, and this is a great start.
Yeah, and earlier I got actually to chat with one of the co-founders, Nav Agarwal. Hi Nav, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Jahali.
So, how does One Step Greener work?
We do a couple of main things. First is obviously teaching people the importance of waste segregation and how to segregate waste, because that's not something which many people are known to in our hometown. After that, we're like, hey, okay, you know the problem. We'll come to your home, pick up your waste, and we'll recycle it.
Why did you set up One Step Greener?
So in September of 2017, the Ghazipur landfill, which is 65 meters tall, one of the world's largest landfills, collapsed, caught on fire, killed 2 people, and released tons of toxic gases. That's when we really realized that waste is actually a huge, huge problem and contributes to more than 30% of my home city's air pollution.
Recently, India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, promised to replace the notorious trash mountains with recycling plants. Will this solve India's problem?
It could barely do anything compared to what we really need. Is they're not trying to go to the source, right? The source of the waste is the residents of the country. And I feel personally, it definitely will not solve this crisis, because for you to solve any crisis, you have to go to the root of the problem. You can't just go to the end and say, okay, I'm going to start recycling over here, because by the time it gets to the end, it's barely recyclable. Barely any percentage of the waste is actually recyclable, and you can't really do much about it at that period of time.
Nav, thank you so much for talking to us, and good luck with the project.
So Jahawi, check this out.
What is it?
Well, this week, plans for having a floating city in South Korea have been approved.
I think it's a great idea. Could this be a potential solution to rising sea levels?
It definitely could be. The project is a collaboration between the City of Busan, Ocean IX, and the United Nations Human Settlement Programme. And it's said to be 75 hectares, so that it can fit 10,000 people.
That sounds pretty impressive, and I look forward to seeing the results of this project.
Yeah, so do I. It's very exciting. So Jahawi, something that really surprised me this week was a report saying that 1/3 of all microplastics that are entering British waters come from tyres, and they're known as wear particles.
I had no idea this was such a huge problem. But just to clarify, we are talking about vehicle tyres, like car tyres.
Yeah, we are. When you're driving along the road and there's friction between the road and your tyres, and it causes them to wear down, and these particles are then released into the environment.
But you know, when you think about car tyres, you naturally think of rubber. So are they being made of plastic now?
Tyres used to be made solely of natural rubber, but now they're made from a mix of the natural rubber and synthetic rubber, which is made from plastic polymers.
That is quite concerning, especially if you think that people are driving cars all around the world.
Yeah, it really is, but luckily some people are trying to take action to solve this problem. And one group in particular is the Tyre Collective. And I got the chance to speak to a co-founder and the Chief Scientific Officer, Siobhan Anderson, about their answer to this problem. Hi Siobhan, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Ella. Thank you for having me here.
So, what's your approach to solving the problem of tire wear?
Yeah, so we're creating a tire wear capture device. It uses some patent pending technology that we invented that can collect the tire wear particles as they're produced at source. So because of the kinetic friction between the tire and the road, a small charge is actually passed on to the particles. And using that, we can use electrostatic precipitation to direct and attract the particles, and the particles can be reused and recycled back into other products.
Now people are making the change to electric cars. Will this have an impact on tire wear, or will it stay the same?
Electric cars are actually a really interesting opportunity. They solve a lot of the problems we're seeing from pollution, but at the same time, they're also actually heavier than gas counterparts. And anyone that's been in an electric car can tell you as well, they accelerate really fast. So what that means is they wear through tires faster. So this is a huge problem that we need to think about. If we're imagining a world with zero emissions, then we need to actually take into account all sources of emissions.
What stage of development is the technology at?
Well, we actually just finished our first trial. It was an amazing milestone for us to go from our a small scale lab prototype and seeing that scale up to full size, how it is right now.
Thanks so much, Siobhan. It was good to talk to you.
Ella, take a look at this.
Oh, whoa. I mean, it's just a reminder of how powerful animals are and just how loud as well.
It is intense. But if you remember last week, we were talking about tigers fighting over territory in Nepal. Well, these two tigers are in India, and it's a mother and a daughter, and they're fighting over territory. And they're in Ranthambore National Park in northern India.
Oh, it's very intense. I mean, I've had some arguments with my mum, but nothing quite like that. So, Jahawi, a recent report says that nearly half of Britain's biodiversity has gone since the Industrial Revolution.
That's a pretty staggering statistic. I mean, how does that compare with other countries?
Well, actually, Britain has lost more of its biodiversity than almost anywhere else in Western Europe.
Wow. I mean, is there anything being done to reverse this?
Thankfully, yes, there are lots of rewilding programs that are happening in Britain, and that's where protected areas are given back to nature. And one project in particular is the Afric Highlands project in Scotland.
Afric Highlands is an ambitious landscape-scale project encompassing about 2,000 square kilometres in the Highlands of Scotland. The main objective of Afric Highlands is to restore nature on a grand scale, restoring habitat and biodiversity and recovering the land's ability to sequester carbon.
I spoke to Richard Bunting from Trees for Life, who are part of the Afric Highlands project. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Ella. Nice to be here. Thanks.
Who are Trees for Life, and why have they been entrusted with the Afric Highlands project?
Well, Trees for Life's grown over the years, and it's become a major rewilding charity in Scotland. Afric Highlands is a big, ambitious project stretching from Loch Ness to the west coast of Scotland, and it will be Britain's biggest rewilding project. And Trees for Life and a lot of the local landowners are working together with the community to create this big, nature-friendly, nature recovery rewilding zone covering this huge swathe of the Highlands.
Why is this rewilding project so important?
It's partly because we're facing a global nature crisis and climate breakdown. And really that nature emergency, this collapse we've seen in biodiversity with wildlife species after wildlife species tumbling towards extinction, it's a massive issue, clearly. And Scotland's hills, they are really beautiful, but there's something missing, and that's woodland. A lot of the hills of Scotland should be blanketed in native forest. Peat bogs, absolutely precious habitat. They're often in a bad way, and that's bad news for the climate, because peatland, peat bogs, are brilliant carbon sinks. They're better than the rainforest at soaking up carbon dioxide. But when they're in a bad way, which is the case for 80% of our peat bogs in this country, they begin emitting carbon dioxide. So these are some of the reasons why this really big, ambitious African Highlands project has been launched.
Is there anything others could be doing to help with biodiversity loss?
I'd say people can rewild in their own back gardens, in their yards, in their communities, in their local parks. It's a form of rewilding. It might be micro rewilding, but you know, talk to your local council. If you've got your own garden in a wildlife-friendly way. Start working with nature, not against it. Also be helping connectivity of nature around the country.
Thanks so much, Richard. It was good to speak to you.
So Ella, I came across this rather cool company called Woodio, and they're making toilets and basins out of, guess what? Wood.
Oh, how does that work? Wouldn't the wood just rot?
So they're a company based in Finland, and they're taking waste wood, like wood chips from mills that would otherwise be discarded, and they're melting that with resins to create these waterproof surfaces.
Oh, that's really interesting. And it looks really stylish too.
Yeah, well, you could have yourself a new stylish bathtub for the cool price of 4,000 euros.
Dad, what do you think about this? We could have a new bathtub for 4,000 euros.
What? You've got to be joking.
Okay, that might be a no. But are there any advantages to using wood instead of ceramics?
Ceramics take a lot of energy to make, and although they're engineered to last a very long time, with people constantly redesigning their houses, they actually often end up in landfills.
Well, Jahowie, toilets and sinks aren't actually the strangest thing made from wood. A company called UPN are developing a satellite made from plywood.
Plywood? Really?
Yeah, I should mention it's going to be 4 by 4 inches and should be launched next year. I just can't believe that a plywood satellite is going to be sent 340 miles from the Earth into orbit.
Well, it would appear that's all we have time for.
Oh, Jahowie, come on. I know you're better than this.
See you next week.
Bye.
Hey, Ella.
Hi, Jahowie. So what have you been up to?
Well, I've just been preparing for a big week of diving.
Oh, that sounds very exciting.
It is. So, what's caught your eye in the news this week?
Well, as you know, historically, Russia have been a bit behind in sustainable practices and sustainable energies, but there are some signs that this could be changing.
Indeed so. I mean, at COP26, Russia pledged to end deforestation by 2030. And President Putin also said that they want to reach net zero by 2060 with their carbon emissions.
Yeah, COP26 did a great job of putting pressure on countries to sign up to sustainable practices. Lots of NGOs and individual activists in Russia also played a big part. Vladimir Slivyak and his NGO Eco Defense have been campaigning on environmental issues in Russia since the late 80s. This week, Vladimir was recognised for his commitment to the environment and was awarded a Right Livelihood Award, which is considered to be an alternative Nobel Prize. After the ceremony, we were able to put some questions to him. I'll read the questions out. You've been an environmental activist for most of your life. Is it getting easier or harder?
Unfortunately, right now it's the most problematic time in Russia for environmental activism, actually for any kind of activism. I think there were several thousands of people who either left country or got to jail because of activism this year. So it's absolutely the worst time that I've seen in my life for the last 32 years.
Over your career, what achievements are you most proud of?
Well, definitely stopping the construction of several nuclear reactors. That's been a nuclear power plant with 2 reactors near Kaliningrad in Russia, and stopping the project of construction of 8 nuclear reactors, Russian nuclear reactors in South Africa. In my experience, fighting nuclear power industry is probably the most difficult thing in environmental activism, but it was also quite remarkable when we, for the first time in Russian history, stopped the development of a new coal mine in the heart of a Russian coal industry.
When President Putin retires, do you think Russia's next generation of ruling politicians will have a more enlightened approach to the environment, climate change and saving the planet?
I definitely believe it, and I really want to believe in it. Well, of course, it depends on who exactly comes after Putin and whether this young, more educated, on environment and climate generation really allowed to take power in their hands. Because right now, the main problem we're facing politically in Russia is that President Putin doesn't like to go, and he wants to stay in power probably as long as he lives. So the very good question, when and who exactly get this power, because one day our president will have to go anyway, one way or another.
So Ella, take a look at this.
Oh, what's going on?
This is just a massive pod of dolphins off the coast of South Africa.
That is amazing. I don't think I've ever seen so many dolphins in one place before. Have you ever seen anything like this, Jahowi?
To this degree, very, very rarely. I mean, this is something that you don't see that often and never so close to shore. And the crazy thing, there's even a whale in there. And probably what's happening is they've found a big school of fish, sardines or something like that, and they're now rounding them up into one massive bait ball. And then so underwater is just this incredible feeding frenzy.
Wow, they are very clever animals. It must be such an honour to be there to witness this.
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to be underwater in there. I mean, the sight and sound of it all must have just been insane. So Ella, recently in the Philippines, police have been getting huge hauls of illegally harvested giant clams. And in one seizure alone, they seized 200 tons, estimated to be about $25 million.
Oh, that definitely can't be good news.
No, it's not good news. Giant clams are an important food source for peoples in Asia and the Pacific regions. And on top of that, they're incredibly important for biodiversity on coral reefs.
So why are people harvesting them then?
Well, in recent years, they've been seen as a luxury food item, and their shells are actually being used as an ivory replacement in the ornamental carving trade.
Oh wow, that's surprising.
Indeed. Earlier, I got to chat to Olivia Svak-Goldman, the Executive Director of Wildlife Justice, who recently conducted an investigation into the matter. Hi, Olivia. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Jahowi. Thanks for having me.
Can you explain the report's findings?
It identified this enormous surge in the trafficking of giant clams. And this giant clams aren't necessarily a cuddly type of species, so they're often overlooked. So we thought it was really important first to just raise the alarm that this is happening so people know about it, and also to say what we don't know about it. So there are a lot of intelligence gaps that haven't been addressed sufficiently in terms of the modus operandi, in terms of the trafficking routes, in terms of the potential corruption that's enabling it. So we think it's really important that law enforcement in the identified countries are increasing the resources to look at this issue.
So what is the root cause for the demand in giant clams?
So giant clams are one of the potential ivory substitutes. So what we saw, for example, is when the Chinese government banned the domestic sale of elephant ivory, they did promote the use of ivory substitutes. So if you carve them, they can look very, very similar to elephant ivory, and they're used for very similar types of ornaments. There is some concern that the promotion of giant clams is maintaining a demand.
How will wildlife justice continue to fight this issue?
What we need to do is we need to be addressing it as transnational organized crime. While it's important to focus on the poachers and the lower level criminals as well, at the Wildlife Justice Commission, we really focus on going after those high level criminals that are organizing the crime. And then if you take them out, if you get them successfully not only arrested, but also successfully prosecuted and convicted, you can have a real impact on those networks and therefore make a big impact.
So Jahowi, have you ever seen one of these before?
No, I can't say I have. Could it be some sort of drone?
No, it's not a drone or a plane, but it's actually known as a sea dragon. It's not exactly what I would have thought of if you mentioned dragon, but still cool.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, if you tell me sea dragon, I'm thinking of this little nudibranch that looks very cool that actually eats jellyfish. So what is this?
Yeah, this is pretty different. It's developed by a Swedish company called Ministo, and it's developed to harness some of the sea's energy to make electricity. And the way they work is they're attached to the seabed and move around in a figure-of-8 movement to capture the tidal power. And according to the company, it's a much more efficient way of doing so than more of the traditional methods.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of tidal power before and seen some of them, but they look nothing like this. I mean, are there any that are currently in use?
Yeah, there are some installed around the Faroe Islands between Iceland and Norway. Last year, they harnessed enough energy to make electricity for around 60 houses, and there are more plans to install some bigger sea dragons in the future.
Wow, this is amazing tech, and I know some places in Kenya that could really do with this kind of technology.
Yeah, I think it would be great if they were installed all over the world.
So Ella, the Icelandic Forest Service say that if you're feeling stressed, you should go out and hug a tree.
Oh, really? I mean, I've heard the term tree hugger thrown around a bit, but I didn't realise people actually do it to reduce stress.
Well, you know, it's really taking off. And I mean, there's even a tree hugging world championship in the Halupu forest in Levi in Finland. And in Kerala in India, they organized an event, the largest ever tree hugging event, which was attended by 4,620 people.
You know what, Jahawi, you're actually making it sound quite fun.
You know, I won't lie, I have hugged a couple of trees in my time.
Yeah, well, I'm more into planting trees, but you never know.
Well, on that note, see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, Ella.
Hi, Jahawi, how are you doing?
I'm good. Just literally got out the sea a couple of minutes ago from diving.
That sounds very fun, more exciting than my boring schoolwork, but hey, at least it's almost the holidays.
True. So, what's grabbed your attention in the news this week?
According to a recent report, over the past 10 years, there's been lots of resistance from Indigenous peoples against the oil and gas projects happening across North America. And their work has stopped about 1.6 billion tonnes of greenhouse gases from being emitted into the atmosphere, and that's about the equivalent of taking 345 million cars off the road.
Wow, that's remarkable. Personally, I think it's great to see such groups standing up to governments and big industry in an attempt to reduce further fossil fuel extraction.
Yeah, Frida Hewson of the Wet'suwet'en tribe has been campaigning against the Coastal GasLink pipeline that runs across her tribe's traditional lands in Western Canada.
We've been here since time immemorial, before anybody came to these lands, and your law can bend the rules to let somebody come in and destroy our land. And you get you guys to help them. If it was your house, you'd feel the same.
You're trespassing on Wet'suwet'en land! You continue to remove us forcibly from our lands with your rifles, with your semi-automatic weapons. Nothing has changed in 150 years.
Only last week, the company responsible for building the pipeline were ordered to address the outstanding environmental breaches by the State Environment Department. Also last week, Frida was recognised for all of her work and was awarded a Right Livelihood Award, which is considered to be the equivalent of a Nobel Prize. Earlier, I got the chance to speak to Frida. As the law currently stands, what rights do your people have to your ancestral lands?
So we have legal documents showing that we have every right to be on those lands, and they're just ignoring it to benefit and suit themselves, the government and industry.
Tell us what direct action you and your people took to delay and resist the pipeline's construction.
In 2020, we were just doing a ceremony, and we lit a ceremony fire right in the middle of the road, and so we got arrested. And after we got arrested, a lot of our supports were outraged, and Canada ended up getting shut down because the railways were blocked, the ports were blocked, so people were outraged that we were forcibly removed off our land because we have every legal rights to be on our own lands.
The Coastal GasLink pipeline, which you have strongly opposed, is still under construction. What kind of precedent do you think this sets for other Indigenous lands?
Well, Coastal GasLink has been ruthless and is still trying to build their project, and I believe the Canadian government and industry is trying to make an example out of us and trying to put fear in us by sending in militarized police. They didn't want us to be successful because they said we'd set precedents for other First Nations in Canada.
Thanks for speaking to us, Frida. So, Jahawi, have you ever seen these before?
Well, for once, I actually know what you're showing me.
I'm not quite sure if they're exactly what you think they are. They're not just an ordinary pair of shoes. These are called Johnny shoes, and they can actually grow into trees.
Grow into trees? I mean, so do they grow into trees and produce more trainers?
That would be very cool. I don't think that's quite how it works, though. It is a very exciting invention. It's made fully of biodegradable materials and has an apple seed in the sole. So when you're done with using your trainers, instead of just letting them go to landfill, you can plant them in the ground and a tree will grow.
Simple as that. So Ella, last week Australia's Great Barrier Reef had its annual spawning event.
Oh, so do corals only spawn once a year?
Yeah. And because males and females can't move into reproductive contact, they simultaneously release both eggs and sperm at the same time over, let's say, a 2-week period to increase chances of successful reproduction.
I'd never really thought about how corals reproduce before.
It's fascinating, you know. Yesterday when we were out on the boat, we actually saw coral spawn as well. So it seems to be happening on this side of the world too. Earlier, I spoke to Kate Quigley of the Australian Institute of Marine Science about the event and how she goes about collecting samples for her research in creating more heat-resilient coral. Hi, Kate. Thanks for joining us. So, what is the current condition of the Great Barrier Reef?
So the Great Barrier Reef is a very complex and biodiverse ecosystem that is roughly the size of Italy. And generally, we like to think of the Great Barrier Reef as one of the most healthy reef ecosystems in the world. And that's due to really good management, as well as predominantly being very far from the coastline. Unfortunately, the last few years, since 2016, have been pretty catastrophic on the reef. We've had these really big bleaching events, and that has really corresponded to a lot of death on the Great Barrier Reefs.
Can you explain to me the significance of this spawning event on the Great Barrier Reef?
So coral spawning is so important for the Great Barrier Reef because that is the time of renewal and recovery for this ecosystem. And so if it only occurs once or twice a year, that is really the only opportunity that the reef has for the next generation of corals. So in 2016, 2017, and then again in 2020, we had these mass die-offs of corals. So we lost a lot of corals in these just a few years. And so we're really relying on natural spawning events like the spawning that we had this year to help repopulate coral reefs with the new generation of babies in order to get this recovery into the future.
How will the work you're doing help with the conservation of the Great Barrier Reef?
So at AIMS, as part of the Reforestation and Adaptation Program, I'm looking at selective breeding in corals. And so what this entails is choosing parent corals that we know are good at surviving high seawater temperatures and mixing their eggs and sperm in specific combinations in order to produce baby corals, or the next generation of corals, that will be better able to survive warming temperatures in the future. So potentially, if we can get this kind of intervention to scale, we could essentially plant these heat-tolerant, resistant baby corals back onto the Great Barrier Reef in order to help recovery in the years to come.
Thanks for talking with me today, Kate.
Jahawi, take a look at this. It's a young leopard that's gone into a home in Karnataka in South India.
Wow, poor leopard. I mean, that leopard does look fairly young, so maybe he was out looking for food and got trapped in someone's house and obviously just panicked.
Yeah, you do have to feel bad for the leopard. It must have been very scary. But you also feel for the people too, because imagine how terrifying it would be having the leopard lunge at you like that.
Yeah, I mean, a leopard backed into a corner is not a happy leopard.
No, absolutely not. But luckily there were wildlife officers who came to help the leopard out and take it back into the wild.
So Ella, researchers in the USA have found out that they can use methane emissions to grow food for fish, and it's actually cheaper and more sustainable than extracting fish from the wild to feed fish farms.
So how does that work?
Well, currently it's in research stages, but methane is captured and used to feed these microorganisms, which in turn become fish food. Therefore, this takes out harmful greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and further reduces the need for more fishing.
Oh, that's really interesting. I actually found another story that involves using waste and turning it into usable products, and that's a way of turning plastic bottles into vanilla.
Really? You must be joking.
I know it sounds pretty crazy, but researchers have engineered E. coli bacteria to specifically turn a substance from plastic bottles into vanillin, which is the organic compound which gives vanilla its taste and its smell.
Wow, I mean, that's really interesting because vanilla is used in everything from food to pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and even cleaning products.
Yeah, exactly. The natural supply of vanilla can't keep up with the demand for it, so already lots of our vanilla is synthesized from chemicals derived from fossil fuels, and this would be a way of using less fossil fuels and using up waste from plastic.
So, potentially in the future, we could all be eating ice cream made from plastic bottles?
And apples grown from shoes.
Well, on that note, bye-bye.
Bye!
Hey Ella, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Very excited for Christmas. Just got to get all of the jobs done first. But actually, I was thinking, what is Christmas like in Kenya for you?
Well, you know, it's actually quite funny because we do have Christmas trees and fake snow. And I mean, here on the beach, people do make snowmen out of sand, but it's the middle of summer and it's hot.
Yeah, that is weird to think you're having a hot Christmas while we're having a freezing cold one.
True. So Ella, what's caught your eye in the news this week?
Well, in London, the nominees for the People's Choice Awards for this year's Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition have been announced. There were so many amazing entrants from all over the world.
Yeah, there's some stunning photography. I particularly like Thomas Peschak's really charming picture of a meerkat just posing for him in the camera.
Yeah, my favourite has to be of a grey kangaroo in the middle of all of the destruction after the Australian wildfires. It was taken by Joanne MacArthur, who's been a wildlife photojournalist for the past 20 years, and I got to speak to her earlier. Hi Joanne, thanks for joining me today.
Hi Ella, it's great to be here.
So, where were you when the Australian wildfires erupted? And what made you want to travel over there and document them?
We were hearing a lot about the environmental and the humanitarian crisis, but a lot less about the animals. And in fact, over 3 billion animals were either killed or displaced during that time. And so I got on a plane from my home here in Toronto and went and spent 2 weeks driving thousands of kilometers with an NGO called Animals Australia, documenting the effects of the fires on the animals.
Tell us how you went about capturing this photo.
One day I was with a group who were doing koala rescues. They were dehydrated and burned koalas up in the eucalyptus trees. And amidst the trees were kangaroos, dead and alive. And here was one living kangaroo with a joey in her pouch. And I crouched down and I got that picture and she hopped away. And I think it's such a meaningful photo to people because it shows the desolation. She's in her burned home, but it also is a story of hope because she's a survivor and her joey in her pouch is a survivor as well.
You've documented many cases of animals suffering as a result of the mistreatment by humans. Do you think the wildfires in Australia were a natural disaster or a consequence of human action?
We're seeing a lot more natural disasters now that the climate is shifting. We know that the climate is shifting in part because of how we treat the planet, how we use resources. So, if we want to curb these floods and these fires, we need to curb our resource use. And we probably need to reduce our animal consumption as well, because we know that that contributes to climate change.
Ella, check this out.
I can't quite tell what's going on here. Wait, hang on, is that a rhino?
Yes, it is.
So what's it doing upside down?
Now, it may look peculiar, but in a recent study, it's shown that when tranquilized, rhinos breathe much better upside down.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, and as you know, both black and white rhino are endangered, so being able to move them safely to secure locations is vital.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Ella, on a more serious note, the South African government has granted Shell permission to undertake a seismic blasting survey of South Africa's coastal seabed.
I've heard of seismic blasting before. It's when high-powered, super loud air guns are shot at the seabed, and the echoes are then measured to help map where offshore oil and gas reserves could be.
Exactly. And South African people have been protesting against it, especially because environmentalists have said that this disturbs, injures, and can even kill marine wildlife. Recently, hundreds of people gathered in Cape Town to voice their concern.
I just feel really strongly about what's going on at the Wild Coast. I've got quite a personal relationship with the Wild Coast. I think the pursuit of oil in general is just in favor of profits, and I think it's absolutely disgusting. And I know that I won't rest well if I know that I haven't done something to try and fight against seismic surveys in the Wild Coast.
The social impact and the sustainability implications of allowing Shell to do what they are doing in our oceans are huge, and the ripple effect impacts so many communities and peoples, and not just for the next few years, for many years to come. And it's just irresponsible of our leaders to agree Shell to come and do it here when the rest of the world is saying no to them. Why are we saying yes?
A little earlier, I spoke to Lucille Chapuis, who is a sensory ecologist studying the effects of sound on aquatic organisms. Hi, Lucille. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Howie. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So, can you please first explain to me the importance of sound on marine ecosystems?
Yeah, so it's nowhere different from animals on land, really. Marine organisms will use sound every day to find mates, for social interactions and for reproduction, to navigate as well, to detect predators. And a lot of organisms in the water actually produce sounds themselves to communicate. So not only dolphins and whales, but fishes and invertebrates can produce a whole array of different sounds.
And how does sound penetrate wildlife underwater?
Yes, so the speed of sound in water is about 5 times higher than in air. So the sound doesn't only travel faster, but it also travels much further. And so aquatic animals like fishes have evolved ears which detect the vibrations produced by sound on the water.
Interesting. So, as we understand it, the survey will produce a constant sound, the equivalent of 230 decibels. Now, to put that into context, 180 decibels can cause irreversible damage to the human ear. So, what effect will this survey have on South Africa's marine life?
We know that sounds produced by seismic surveys have the potential to cause injury, hearing loss, behavioral changes. However, data on the effect of air guns are still limited because it's a difficult thing to study, especially on wild animals.
Thanks, Lucille, for chatting with me today.
Well, Jahawi, have you ever seen anything like this? It's the moment when a bull elephant in southern Thailand bashes its way through someone's kitchen.
I've never seen anything like that before.
The homeowners actually were woken up to the elephant trunk pulling down their wall.
That must have been scary. It looks like he was just after some food.
Yeah, it seems he was. They said that he took some instant noodles and rice, and he even came back a few days later in search of more food.
Well, that's one hungry Ellie. So Ella, I've come across this company that has invented a sustainable glitter made from fruit.
Oh, that's such a cool idea because glitter's made from plastic, which isn't easy to recycle, and glitter gets absolutely everywhere, so that's just tiny pieces of plastic blowing around.
That's exactly it. Conventional glitter contains harmful microplastics that pollute the environment and take about 2 weeks to come out of my hair. So this sustainable biodegradable alternative is a really good way to add some sparkle to your Christmas.
Yeah, definitely. And another way to make your Christmas more sustainable is these reusable Christmas trees.
They look just like normal trees.
I guess they kind of are. The only difference is that when you're finished using them after Christmas, you can return them back to the farm that grows the trees and they'll replant it so you can use it the next year.
Well, if it's reusable trees you're after, how about this balloon Christmas tree?
Oh, I can't say I'm a massive fan of that one. So that's about it for this week.
We'll see you in the new year. Have a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Hi Jahowie, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too, Ella. How were your holidays?
They were really great, thanks. Me and my family went to the Isle of Wight, which is an island off the south coast of England, and while we were there we did lots of litter picks and even went for a very cold swim on Christmas morning.
Good for you. I mean, I've been at home, but there's been so much to sort out between diving gear and camera gear, getting it all ready for the new year. So Ella, what's caught your eye in the news this week?
Well, Jahowie, I'd like to start off our first programme of the year with the big news that a Sumatran tiger cub has been born at London Zoo.
Amazing. Tiger cubs are so cute, but it really depends on your stance on zoos as to whether this is good news or not.
It absolutely does. As it stands, there are only estimated to be 300 Sumatran tigers left in the wild, and it's meant to be the rarest subspecies of tiger. But while it's great to have another animal of the species, we do have to bear in mind that this animal has been born in and will grow up in captivity.
So true. And we must remember that although it does happen, it's very unusual for animals born in captivity to end up leading a full life in the wild.
Yeah, that's right. A little earlier, I spoke to Dan Simmons, head keeper of London Zoo. Hi Dan, thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much for having me.
So before we get on to the birth of the Sumatran cub, can you just tell me a bit about how endangered they are in the wild?
Oh, so you know what? Sumatran tiger is one of the most endangered animals on the planet. So they're listed as critically endangered. And just to put that into perspective, if you go back to about the 1970s, they were estimated to be about 1,000, which if you think is a tiny number. And now the number is expected to be around 300, which is tragic and just shows how incredibly important it is to breed these animals and protect their genetics, but also to protect their wild habitats.
But what's caused them and their numbers to decline so much?
Well, you know what? We get asked that question a lot in relation to so many of the species that we have here at London Zoo, for example, and the answer is almost always the same, and you've guessed it, it's us, it's the people that are the problem. So poaching and general conflict with people, and also habitat destruction, which is again it's something that humans are great at doing. We want space and we encroach onto those ever decreasing habitats of these incredibly precious animals.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it just makes the birth of this cub so much more special. So congratulations. And does he or she have a name yet?
Thanks very much. No name just yet. And you know what? Probably the main reason for that is cub's so little that we haven't actually been able to sex the little one yet. So we'll do that first, and that could come at any point. That could just be a bit of luck if little one rolls onto its back and a keeper's nearby and gets a close-up look.
How long has the Zoological Society of London been trying to breed Sumatran tigers?
Well, you know what? As a zoo, we're the oldest zoo in the world. We've been around for nearly 200 years, and we've been breeding tigers for many, many years. We had cubs just a few years ago, and they've since moved on to really important breeding programs in other zoos. So we're extremely experienced as a collection in tiger breeding, and we've always taken it particularly seriously when it comes to, for example, something like a Sumatran tiger, because we know that every one that's born in a zoo environment is particularly valuable when you consider just how few of them there are in the wild.
It would be brilliant to try and find a way to help the numbers in the wild increase again, because lots of people have been voicing concerns that a majority of breeding programs don't try and help introduce these animals back into the wild.
So as an organisation, we always look at the long term and consider that, yeah, maybe one day it will be appropriate and, as I said before, safe for a Sumatran tiger to move from London Zoo to a wild environment. But we're absolutely not there yet. We're nowhere near there yet. But what we are near now is that ability to continually increase that captive gene pool that we can maybe one day draw upon.
I think lots of people's major concern about zoos is the stress that boredom and confinement can cause animals. What are you doing to help with tigers to try and stop this?
So again, really good question, and I'm pleased you asked it, because it's to a degree, it's an emotive topic, but sometimes often misconceived in quite a way. We need to remember first that the animals that are immensely well looked after and loved by their keepers are born into zoo environments. So these are, yes, they might have some wild instincts, but these are not animals that have come from the wild and are therefore having to adjust to this different environment. They're born into zoos, and that for them is normal.
Anyway, I hope everything goes well with the Sumatran cub. Thank you so much for speaking to me, Dan.
Thanks very much. It's been a real pleasure.
So Ella, I've come across some good news. 6 EU supermarkets, including Sainsbury's and Lidl, have committed to stop selling beef imported from Brazil over concerns that the beef is linked to deforestation of the Amazon.
Well, that really is good news. What's caused the supermarkets to make this decision now?
Well, an undercover investigation by Reporter Brazil has found that large quantities of cattle are being raised on illegally deforested land. These cattle are then taken and mixed in with legally raised cattle before being slaughtered, meaning that at the end it's virtually impossible to know whether that meat was raised legally or illegally.
Well, it's brilliant to see the supermarket's new stance on this. I think steps that we can be taking next to make even more progress on the sustainability of meat is making sure that it's all organic and produced in the country that it's going to be consumed in, to save on the massive carbon footprint that transporting meat across oceans can have.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there.
Well, Jahawi, some other good food-related news is that France has banned single-use plastic wrapping of fruits and vegetables.
Great news indeed.
Yeah, it sure is. The law came into force on New Year's Day, and France's President Macron has also said that he wants to ban all single-use plastic by 2040.
Well, let's hope they achieve that and other countries do the same.
Fingers crossed on that one. Continuing with our supermarket theme, check this out.
Oh my God. Is that a monitor lizard?
Yeah, that's right. It's a 6-foot-long monitor lizard that crawled out of a canal and went into a 7-Eleven store in Thailand, just west of Bangkok.
It looks huge.
When it got into the store, it climbed all over the shelves, as you can see.
Wow. Now, having lived in Thailand, I've seen my fair share of strange things in a 7-Eleven, but nothing like this. It's quite hard to figure out what it's doing, because would it be looking for food? I mean, monitor lizards generally try and climb when they're getting away from predators, so it's very interesting behavior.
But anyway, I definitely wouldn't want one in my local shop.
So Ella, another story that might intrigue you is that a group of international scientists working under the collective name of Whale X have created a substance that simulates whale poo, which can be released into the oceans.
Hang on, why on earth would anyone want to try and simulate whale poo?
So the substance they have created stimulates growth in phytoplankton, much like whale poo does. Then the phytoplankton absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and through the process of photosynthesis, it creates oxygen, which it releases back into the atmosphere, acting as natural carbon capture.
That's a great idea, because
as well as reducing the amount of carbon that we add to the atmosphere, we need to really start looking at ways that we can take it back out from the atmosphere again.
To find out more, I spoke to Edwina Tanner, a climate scientist and the leader of WhaleX. Hi Edwina, thank you for joining me today. Where did the idea of making simulated whale poo come from?
The idea came one day just looking at how we might add nutrients to the ocean, and we looked at how whales poo. And looking at how they do it, we thought, well, they've been doing it for 50 million years in the ocean. And being such large animals, they really make a difference to this nutrient cycle, as well as the carbon cycle of the oceans. And we're really just learning how valuable these creatures are to our climate.
What is your substance made from?
So this simulated whale poo contains a lot of nitrogen, small amounts of phosphorus, silicate, and some other elements. Well, the nutrients we were using were denser than water. So we had to add a substance into this, a gel or jelly-like substance to create a bit of air and buoyancy in this material, making sure it stays in the surface ocean, much like the whale poo does.
What are the next steps?
Our modelling tells us that by putting out 300 litres of this simulated whale poo, we have sequestered around 2 tonnes of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So this is what our modelling tells us. And what we need to do now is our next steps and our scale-up experiments will be used to prove this. So we're going to look at the carbon flux from the atmosphere. We're going to look at the satellite images and the chlorophyll or the phytoplankton growth, so how big the patch is and what the colour of that is. And we can tell from that how much carbon is being absorbed.
Thanks for your time today. So Ella, check this out.
What is that? It really looks like something you'd see in outer space or in a sci-fi film or something.
Yeah, this is actually called a barrel-eye fish, and you find them deep below the surface of the ocean, between 600 and 800 meters deep. This particular one was caught on camera off the coast of California the other day.
Well, I don't think I've ever seen an animal with a translucent head before.
Me neither.
When most people think of domestic cats, they think of an animal that's free to live as they please, roaming around gardens and the whole neighbourhood. But unfortunately, that's going to be coming to an end for cats in Fremantle in Western Australia, who will now have to go out on leads.
That sounds ridiculous. I mean, here in Kenya, it's strange enough to see a dog on a lead, but a cat?
Yeah, it will be really weird to see a cat on a lead in your local park, but it is happening for a good reason, and that's to protect the indigenous wildlife in Australia from cats which aren't native to the country.
Ah, that all makes sense now.
Unfortunately, in Australia, urban cats are responsible for killing 60 million birds a year, so hopefully this will help with that number.
Wow, that's a staggering figure, and looks like that's all we have time for today.
Perfect timing, it's just started snowing here. Bye.
Bye. Hey Ella.
Hi Jahowie, it's good to see you again. What have you been up to this week?
Well, this last week I returned to a place called Wa, which is where I spent a lot of my childhood on the coast. And we're planning actually on moving back to set up a new marine conservation project there.
Oh, that's so cool. What will the project be about?
Well, when we were snorkeling the other day, I noticed that the coral growth and reef life was just so beautiful, but there were no fish. So we want to work with the local community to try and create a no fishing zone with the hope of bringing back that whole ecosystem to the benefit of the coral reef and the community.
That sounds amazing, and I'm sure it will be a very rewarding project, so you'll have to keep us updated on how it all goes.
Of course, I'll definitely keep you updated.
So what news have you been drawn to this week?
I've been fascinated by the research coming out on the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica. It's the world's widest glacier and approximately the size of Great Britain. And research suggests that because of global warming, it may collapse and melt in as little as 5 years.
That sounds really serious.
Indeed. To find out more, I spoke to Dr. Ella Gilbert from the University of Reading, who is a climate scientist and Antarctic expert. Hi Ella, thanks for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here.
What are the warning signs that suggest the Thwaites Glacier is melting and collapsing?
Well, Thwaites Glacier has been undergoing a lot of change in recent decades, and at the moment it's the most rapidly changing glacier in Antarctica. So we're seeing that the speed of the glacier has accelerated. In fact, it's doubled in the last 30 years. And at the moment it's contributing about 4% to global sea level rise. So it's basically spitting out a lot of ice into the oceans. It's also getting thinner. So the front of the glacier where it meets the ocean is getting thinner, and it's also developing cracks.
The massive Thwaites Glacier has been labelled the Doomsday Glacier. If it does collapse, what impact will it have on the planet?
So Thwaites has earned this name in the media and kind of generally because it has the potential to contribute around 65 centimetres to global sea levels. Now, even if it kind of rapidly started to destabilise today, that wouldn't be seen immediately. It would still take hundreds of years for that 65 centimeters of sea level rise to be seen. But the reason that scientists are particularly concerned about Thwaites is because there's some indication that it might act as a kind of keystone glacier, so that if it starts to be lost, essentially, if it starts to really rapidly accelerate and disappear, then it could drag other glaciers in the region with it. Now, I should hasten to add that we don't know that Thwaites is definitely going to have this effect, and it could not have that keystone role. And also, even if it did, it wouldn't happen over a very short amount of time. It would still be, centuries worth of change.
Have any other glaciers in Antarctica ever melted before?
Yep, so we've seen sea level rise of around 25 centimetres since about 1880. And a lot of that, about half of that is from melting glaciers, and that's in Greenland as well as Antarctica. The rest is from the thermal expansion of the seas. Other glaciers have kind of rapidly accelerated and thinned, particularly in Greenland, but nothing on the scale of Thwaites. The number one thing we should be focusing on is reducing emissions. It is mitigating and preventing the worst effects of climate change, because that's the only surefire way that we know we can avoid the worst impacts of climate change.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you for your time today.
Pleasure.
Ella, take a look at this.
Oh my gosh! I was not expecting that at all. I hope the customer's okay.
Luckily he is. He just got away with some wounds to his leg.
So what's actually going on here?
According to local sources, the buffalo escaped from an abattoir in the city of Taizhou, just north of Shanghai in China. The buffalo then ran into a restaurant and charged the unknowing customer.
Whoa.
Buffalo can be extremely dangerous. African buffalo are even known to attack and kill lions.
So Jahawi, last week the president of Indonesia announced that he's revoking hundreds of land use permits for logging, mining and palm oil plantations.
That sounds like good news.
Yeah, it can possibly save up to around 2.5 million hectares of rainforest, and this land could then be restored and returned to Indigenous people.
Are there any potential drawbacks?
Unfortunately, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry announced on television that new permits could be issued to business and investors if their revised proposals for the land were considered serious and sensible.
That seems less promising for conservation then.
Indeed. Earlier, to get my head around it, I spoke to Philip Jacobson, a Mongabay Bay journalist and expert on the region. Hi Philip, thanks for joining me.
Great to be here, thanks.
So the president of Indonesia has revoked hundreds of land use permits for logging, mining and palm oil plantations. How come he's done this?
It's a very tricky question. So President Joko Widodo signed a moratorium on the issuance of new permits for palm oil plantations. Indonesia is the world's biggest palm oil producer. And he also mandated a review of existing palm oil plantation permits. So his administration, was supposed to be spending the last 3 years kind of reviewing all the existing permits and potentially coming up with permits that should be revoked. So this recent set of permit revocations, which was announced on January 5th, seems to be one step in that process. But the big question is, how much rainforest will this actually save, right? Or how much land that was previously in the hands of corporate developers will be put in the hands of local communities? So the short answer is we don't really know yet. It could end up saving a lot of rainforest, or it could actually hasten the destruction of some areas of rainforest.
By revoking its land use permits, is Indonesia sending a message to its Southeast Asian neighbours?
You might say that. I mean, these revocations, they're potentially good first step from the perspective of rainforest conservation. I think if Indonesia follows through and put some of these lands in the hands of local communities or zones them for conservation or what have you, that would really send a message to other countries in the region. I mean, there's just so many companies who's are touched by these revocations. Many of them will be trying to hang on to their lands in the coming period of time. There's going to be probably backroom deals going on. There will be legal challenges from some of these companies. And then also, there's tons and tons of community groups, NGOs who work to protect rainforests and other environmentally significant areas. So their fate is very much up in the air right now. So we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Philip. It's been great speaking to you.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jahawi, can you guess what's going on here?
I have no idea what's going on there.
Well, actually, the goldfish is controlling the direction of travel of the tank.
This seems very strange to me.
I know what you mean. Researchers at Ben Gurion University in Israel have created and programmed a vehicle that travels in whichever direction the fish swims. This is part of wider research into whether goldfish can navigate in unfamiliar environments.
A question on everyone's mind.
I know, right?
So, what's the outcome?
Well, researchers have found that goldfish can identify and reach a visual target while navigating in unfamiliar environments. This is evidence that goldfish have the cognitive ability to perform complex tasks.
Well, we have long assumed goldfish to be unintelligent, but I guess this disproves that.
Yeah, for sure. So Jahawi, as you know, there are thousands of endangered animal species and wildlife populations continue to dwindle across the world.
Of course.
Well, new research has shown that as animal numbers decrease, it's having an impact on plant numbers too.
Well, that's concerning, as there are already thousands of plant species that are considered critically endangered. So, how does this new research and the decline in animal numbers link to the decline in plants?
Well, half of all plant species rely on animals to disperse their seeds. So with a reduction in the number of animals, it's more difficult for plants to disperse their seeds and grow. To find out more, I spoke to Evan Frick, the scientist behind this research. Hi Evan, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me here.
Your recent research has shown that a reduction in mammals and birds is in turn reducing plant numbers too. How widespread is this problem though? Is it something that you're seeing more in certain places?
So it's a phenomenon that's really happening all over the world. And that's due to the extinction as well as the range contraction of seed disperser species. So that is pretty striking because we're seeing that ecosystems perhaps have only lost a few % of their bird and mammal species, but we estimate that there's been a 60% reduction of this ability for plants to keep pace with climate change. They're losing their ability to expand into the new habitats that will be suitable under climate change. And so if you were to lose animals from ecosystems, You cut off those processes, and that means that plants are less able to regenerate and respond dynamically to these changes in their environment or adapt to new environments.
What are the potential knock-on effects if the plant species that you've researched become extremely rare or extinct?
If you lose seed dispersers and the plant species that rely on those seed dispersers can't keep pace with climate change, they're going to be stuck in ecosystems that are not suitable for their growth, survival, and reproduction. And that sets up the potential for those not only plant biodiversity to decline, but even the carbon stored by those plant species. If that carbon is lost to the atmosphere, that has the potential to speed up climate change.
It is very alarming to hear about. Are there any solutions to this problem?
We can think about actively restoring seed dispersers back to the landscape. So facilitating their natural reintroduction into their historic habitats, actively reintroducing species into their historic habitats. I think that those are some of the things that can really support our plant communities while also supporting the animal biodiversity that exists within those forests and other vegetation communities.
Thanks very much, Evan. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Pleasure talking with you.
And finally, the Indian government is planning on reintroducing cheetahs after being extinct for 70 years.
I had no idea there ever were cheetahs in India.
Yeah, previously cheetahs were found throughout the Indian subcontinent. Now, the plan is to introduce firstly 10 to 12 individuals from southern Africa into the Kunopalpura National Park in central India.
That sounds really interesting. Let's hope it all goes well.
Indeed, we'll keep an eye on that one.
I think that's about all we have time for. I've got some homework to do.
Well, thank God my days of homework are over.
Yeah, lucky you. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, Jahowie.
Hey, Ella. How are you doing and what have you been up to?
I'm good, thank you. I've actually been pretty busy with my sister for our work for our charity Kids Against Plastic. We were actually in London for a few days recently and had a meeting with the Minister for School Standards, Robin Walker.
Oh, how did that go?
Well, after quite a bit of persuasion, he did agree to re-announce a government target that was set in 2018 to encourage schools to use less plastic by the end of 2022. So that's really exciting news.
Wow, well done. You're always up to some pretty amazing things.
Thank you, so are you. I want to hear what you've been up to this week.
Well, you know how I told you about the dive lab we were running a few weeks ago? Well, now I have the fun job of editing that all together to create a film out of it.
Might be a long job, but I'm sure it'll be worth it. It sounds very cool.
Lots of pretty underwater pictures, so that makes me happy.
So, Jahowie, did you see that the Winter Games have started in Beijing in China?
I did, but I'm particularly curious about how sustainable these games will be.
Yeah, I've been wondering that too.
China stated that these games will be the first carbon neutral games. But I'm curious as to how they'll achieve that, considering that to build the alpine ski resort, they had to cut down 20,000 trees in the Songshan Nature Reserve. And of course, we know China gets half of its power from coal.
Yeah, there are definitely some question marks about how sustainable the Winter Games are.
To get more insight, I spoke to The Guardian's China Affairs editor, Vincent Nye. Hi, Vincent. Thanks for joining me today. There has been some criticism over how sustainable some of the developments of the Olympic sites have been. What has been the organizers' response?
For China this week, putting on a good show seems to be more important than anything else. Conservationists, however, fear it could further damage the local ecology. Songshan National Nature Reserve, you just mentioned, has for many years been a sanctuary to some of the most protected animal and plant species. For example, the golden eagle and the rare orchids. So when news came that this area was going to be affected because of the Winter Olympics, many took to the internet to protest it. So much so, a senior official from the Yanqing County came out to say that the boundaries of the Songshan National Nature Reserve had been redrawn, and the Winter Olympic venue did not fall inside the reserve. But this was not satisfactory to experts. They say that the remapping of the area does not compensate for the loss of the original core area. It will still cause loss of biodiversity. They also criticize the organizers for being opaque in their assessment.
almost 100% of the alpine ski resort snow will be made from snow machines. What environmental impacts could this have?
Well, one of the direct challenges of producing artificial snow is that it consumes a huge amount of water. Some estimated they could need some 49 million gallons of water to cover the entire slope in snow. This has drawn quite a lot of criticism because obviously artificial snow was water and energy intensive. It damaged soil health and caused erosion. It would also put a further strain on one of the most water stressed regions in the country. But this is not a challenge unique to China. Artificial snow has also been used in other Winter Olympics, for example, in 1980, 2010 in Vancouver, Canada, and 2014 in Sochi in Russia.
China has announced that this Winter Games will be the first carbon neutral games. What is the likelihood that that will really be the case?
Well, indeed, officials will point to all environmentally friendly materials they have used for building these venues. President Xi Jinping himself has also said that this year's Winter Games will be what he said, inclusive, open, and clean. But campaigners look at the past examples and they're always skeptical about such a claim.
A report by independent researchers at the Rhodium Group stated that China's annual greenhouse gas emissions exceeded all of developing nations combined. How is China progressing on the issues of renewable energy?
Well, until recently, China has made a huge progress in cutting down pollution and transitioning to using renewable energies. But there are two major problems here, I think. One is that the transition from coal to green energy is still tough, especially at a time of economic slowdown, which China is experiencing at the moment. Secondly, when it comes to renewable energies, technological innovation is always at the heart of this transition. But in the last few years, we have entered an era of great power competition between China and the Western world. And technology decoupling seems to be just happening. And that will have a huge impact on China's green transition.
Thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you for having me.
Jiahui, check out this video from Dongting in southern China.
Oh wow, that's a lot of fish. I'm guessing they were spooked in some way.
Yeah, my understanding of it is that they were spooked by the boat's engine. Ironically, the boat was actually full of volunteers from a local ecological protection association. They're monitoring how the fishing ban on Dongting Lake is going, as it's the second largest freshwater lake in China.
Well, that's a very interesting way to monitor the fish.
Yeah, it is, but it seems that they did get a good idea of how the fishing ban is going, as one of the volunteers said he's never seen so many fish there before. So Jiahui, as you know, animals and plants all across the world are becoming extinct at an accelerated rate.
That's right. And as we saw in our last episode, the loss in wildlife is further reducing the ability for plants to disperse their seeds.
Well, one company in Australia called Airseed have come up with a method to help restore forestation and increase biodiversity. And hopefully this will help to mitigate some of these issues.
I'm really interested to see what they've come up with.
Here's a short clip showing how it works.
Since the last 30 years, the world's lost over 300 million acres of trees. My name's Andrew Walker. I'm a mechanical engineer and the co-founder of Earthshot Technologies. What we need to do is, as humanity, as a globe, stop cutting away the Earth's lungs and start mitigating global warming by reforesting. And that's what Earthshot Technologies is about, is bringing a solution that we can do this reforestation on a global, scalable way.
Earthshot Technologies have developed technology that can plant trees with drum.
We have developed a payload system, which is a delivery system for taking these pods and putting them into the ground.
By making use of a pneumatic firing system, we can plant 2 tree seeds per second and approximately 40,000 trees a day with a team of 2 people. A normal tree planter can do 800 trees per day. We can do 40,000 seeds per day.
Wow, 2 people planting 40,000 trees in a day is incredible.
It really is. The company have also come up with a special seed pod to protect the seed from any insects and animals. And it also provides the seed with the carbon that it needs to grow into a plant, which results in an 80% germination rate.
Amazing. So Ella, for the last 25 years, a family in South Africa's Eastern Cape have created a reserve called Samara that is now thriving and is home to cheetahs, lions, elephant, and they've even had sightings of leopard on the reserve.
How did the family manage that?
Back in the mid-90s, Mark and Sarah Tompkins started buying up farmland and restoring land to nature. By 2003, they had bought 11 farms with an area totaling 27,000 hectares.
Oh, that's fantastic news.
It sure is. Currently, the Samara Game Reserve borders the Karoo's Kamdaboo National Park to the west. The Tompkins plan is to expand the reserve to join with the Mountain Zebra National Park to the east, thus creating, in their own words, South Africa's largest mega reserve, totaling 526,000 hectares.
Well, I really hope that they can achieve that. So Jahawi, next week X Prize and Elon Musk's carbon removal competition will reopen. The competition is open to anyone who can create and demonstrate an effective way of removing carbon directly from the atmosphere or from the ocean, and sequester it durably and sustainably. The winner will receive $50 million US, and the runners-up will also share $50 million.
Wow, that is a lot of money.
One company that's entered the competition is called Crops. Their idea is to take waste crop residue and place it at the bottom of the ocean, therefore storing the carbon that's already been captured by the crops.
Seems relatively straightforward.
To find out if it is as simple and effective as it sounds, I spoke to David Mitchell, director and founder of Crops. Hi David, thanks for joining me. Are there any negative environmental impacts of putting crops at the bottom of the sea?
So the bottom line is there's a lot of research done before it's done. And because the ocean is so huge, there are a large number of very safe areas to do this where we're not disturbing the minimal biome down there. And in some cases, it may actually create artificial reefs because of the bales going down there, the bales of cornstover, so that it might actually create more habitable areas for the small amount of ocean life that is down.
What about crops that have pesticides on them? Can they be put in the ocean safely?
That's a very good question. So what happens is that if a farmer is growing crops, knowing that the crop waste will be sequestered, there'll be certain minimum standards in terms of what is put down and also testing for that. And what's important is that what's in the bales will stay in the bales. And that's very significant because it's high pressure, there's no sunlight, and there's virtually no oxygen. So what we found is that the bales go down and stay virtually unchanged. And in measurements over a 10-year period, we've seen no changes. So this is a very, very safe, it's almost like the perfect refrigerator, the perfect storage. It's in stasis.
How scalable is this method of carbon capture?
Well, let me give you an example. The Corn Belt in the United States produces almost 1 billion tons of crop waste a year. This means in the United States alone, there is close to 1 billion tons of carbon that could theoretically be sequestered. Let's say that only 20% wants to happen. That's 200 million tons a year, not 4,000 or 10,000 tons, 250 million tons a year. Now you look at the global production of corn and maize and soybeans, we are talking upwards of 3 gigatons potentially, and realistically 1.5 gigatons, which means 1.5 billion tons a year could be stored sustainably. And the ocean is so huge that there's plenty of room for it without disturbing any ecosystems in a measurable amount.
Well, David, many thanks for talking to me.
Thank you.
And finally, just before we go, take a look at this.
I can't quite make it out. Is that a dog?
Yeah, that's right. This is Millie, a Jack Russell, who was led to safety off a mudflat on the south coast of England, using a sausage hanging from a drone.
No way.
I know, it's one of those stories where you have to see it to actually believe it. But Millie slipped her collar and was missing for several days. But because the mudflats are too dangerous for people to walk on because of risks of getting stuck or drowning. Rescuers came up with the idea to tie a sausage to a drone and lure her to safety. And thankfully it worked.
She sure is one silly sausage.
Oh no, that's gonna be your worst joke yet.
Let's leave it there this week.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Hi Jahowie.
Hi Ella, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm actually on holiday at the moment with my family in the beautiful Yorkshire Dales in the north of England. But of course, as well as just relaxing, we've been trying to do a 5-minute litter pick every day.
Well, I'm impressed. Even when you're on holiday, you seem to be trying to make the world a better place.
Well, it's only 5 minutes, but everything helps. So what have you been up to?
Well, you remember I mentioned the conservation project we're working on in Lamu the other week? Well, we're preparing for a big coral survey up there at the beginning of March. But logistics have been a little bit tricky because we're trying to get 10 divers in the water each time. But we're getting there.
Well, I'm sure it will all be worth it when the project's fully underway.
For sure.
So, Jahowie, did you see that the Brazilian Amazon recorded the most deforestation ever for the month of January?
I did see that. It's quite shocking.
Yeah, it is. New satellite data has shown that Brazil lost 43,000 hectares of rainforest last month, which is 5 times the amount that was lost in January 2021.
That's an enormous amount of rainforest to lose in 1 month.
Yeah, it really is, and it's estimated that, at this rate, an area the size of Delaware could be lost in a year.
What caused the surge in deforestation this year?
Well, of course, as usual, lots of deforestation was caused by cutting down trees for their wood, as well as to make space for growing soya and for cattle farming. But lots of people are blaming this surge in deforestation on the government for relaxing some of its environmental protections for the rainforest.
All this despite Brazil's pledge at the COP26 conference in November to end deforestation by 2030.
Yeah, it will be really interesting to see how they manage that after seeing so much bad news so far. But to get a bit more insight into this, I spoke to Tasso Azevedo, who's founder of the NGO Imaflora, which is one of Brazil's leading conservation organisations. Hi Tasso, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Critics have suggested that the Brazilian government, President Bolsonaro in particular, is to blame for the upsurge in deforestation.
For the first time in our recent history, like let's say at least in the last 40 years, that we have a government that it's not just limiting the action, but in certain cases is taking actions that incentivize what's going on in terms of deforestation. But, just a couple of weeks ago, the president was, celebrating with the trade fairs for, agriculture, cattle, livestock, and etc. He's bragging that, we decreased 80% the penalties. And so now the producers don't have the state going over them, something like this, like celebrating as if it was something positive.
What do you think is the best solution for preventing further deforestation in the Amazon?
So since this is like a problem intrinsically related to illegality, there is basically 3 things that if you move will change the perception and then can change the reality. One is you want to be sure that if any deforestation that happens, it's detected. Then we are very good on this. So there is no forest in the world that is more monitored than the Amazon. The second part is once you have something detected, you want to be sure that it's transformed into meaningful information and actions are taken over anything that is illegal. And the third pillar is to guarantee that even if you are not receive the penalty completely, that you will not benefit from the deforestation.
Do you think we'll ever reach the point where the rest of the world will have to step in to end deforestation in the Amazon?
The best thing people can do from outside is to be sure that you are not relating yourself with deforestation and support strongly the people that are actually conserving or protecting the forest against deforestation. Just as a simple example, Indigenous people, right? So I think that's the best way we can have the support from outside. The job of actually stopping that, it has to be done internally, but there is a long way to go.
Well, thanks very much for talking to me today.
Sure.
Well, Ella, take a look at this clip from Tanay, just east of Manila in the Philippines.
And I'll be doing a lot of stuff in my YouTube. But the thing is, I still need like more than
Well, everything looks normal so far.
get monetized. Looking for a perfect.
Oh my god, no, that came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting that.
I know, it's incredible. The man was recording a vlog for his channel when this serpent eagle just flew into his window and gave him a fright.
That is so bizarre.
Well, once he got over his initial fright and stopped to take a photo, he actually noticed that this serpent eagle was injured. So then he took the eagle to his brother, who happens to be a vet. And then the two brothers nursed this eagle back to health and released it 4 days later.
Maybe the eagle just wanted a ride to the vet then. So Jahawi, I guess you've been looking at the winners of the Underwater Photographer of the Year competition this week.
Yes, I have. I mean, it's right up my street. So photographers from all over the world submitted over 5,000 images into 13 categories, including a macro category, a wide-angle category, a portrait category, and even a marine conservation category.
These photos are just absolutely amazing. So which one was the winner?
Rafael Fernandez Caballero won the title of Underwater Photographer of the Year and also won the wide-angle category with his incredible image of a whale shark entitled Dancing with the Giants of the Night.
What a great photo, and as an underwater photographer yourself, you must know how difficult it is to take such incredible photos like this one.
You know, if you just get a great shot of one whale shark, that's already incredible, but 5, this is definitely a once-in-a-lifetime picture. So Ella, from one underwater story to another. New research has shown that attaching green lights to fishing nets can significantly reduce the amount of non-targeted species like sharks and rays and turtles that are caught. However, target species that you're after, whatever they may be, are not affected.
Wow, that's a seriously remarkable discovery.
So, during the research period, they found that nets which had the green lights attached to them caught up to 63% less non-targeted species.
That's fantastic news. Do they know why the green lights are so effective?
More research needs to be done to figure out why, but one of the theories is that species like turtles and sharks and even squid have good eyesight and can actually avoid the nets with these lights on. And it's great for the fishermen too, because it's much easier for them to find their nets.
That is really great, and hopefully it's something that will be rolled out all across the world.
So Ella, I came across some amazing news that chimpanzees in the West African nation of Gabon have been spotted treating their own and each other's wounds with insects.
Whoa, that's extraordinary.
Yeah, it really is. So to get more insight into it, I spoke to Simona Pica, who observed and recorded this behavior. Hi, Simona. Thanks for joining me.
You're welcome.
You observed chimpanzees treating their own wounds and each other's wounds with insects. Can you describe exactly what you saw?
Yeah, so the first time we observed it, that was a chimpanzee female, Zuzi. She was sitting up and catching an insect from underneath a bush. And then she took the insect, she put it into her mouth, and she also seems to press it a little bit with her lips. And then she's taking it out of the mouth, and then she grabbed the foot of her son, and then she applied it onto the wound.
What do we know about the insects that they used? Do they have medicinal properties?
Yeah, that's the thing. We don't know anything at the moment because so far we were not able to recover any of these insects. We're also not sure at the moment, is it just one species they're using or several species they're using? So it could be something insects have in their body, and there has been a lot of research showing antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal functions, but it also just could be an anti-inflammatory function.
What does this behavior indicate about chimpanzees' social behavior in general?
Yeah, it could be that this is qualifying as pro-social behavior. And at the moment, there's still a discussion going on whether it's only humans who engage in pro-social behavior, because this has been linked with empathy in humans, meaning If we see somebody with a wound, then, for instance, we know that it's painful. And so we have an understanding that it's also causing the other person some pain. And we don't really know whether this wound tending behavior is then evidence for empathy in chimpanzees, but it's for sure showing that chimpanzees are taking care and caring for the welfare of another being.
Has this sort of social behavior been witnessed in any other species?
I mean, there are many studies on just self-medicative behavior in many orders and many species, but it has never been observed that they are catching and using insects to put them on wounds, and it has also never been observed that they are doing this for their conspecifics.
Many thanks for talking to me today.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Wow, that's fascinating. And what's your take on it, Jahawi? Do you think that chimpanzees do have the ability to demonstrate empathy?
Do you know what? Having spent time with wild chimpanzees in the Mahale Mountains in Tanzania, I definitely think that they have the ability to show empathy.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you there, but it's hard to say for sure, so I'm looking forward to seeing any research that follows up.
And finally, as it's International Polar Bear Day this week, I have to show you some more photos.
That picture of the two polar bears in the window is so great.
These photos were taken by Dmitry Koch, who discovered the polar bears in an abandoned weather station on Kolyuchin Island in the far east of Russia, close to Alaska.
How did the photographer manage to get so close to the bears?
So the photographer used a drone which had these special low-noise propellers attached to it, which seems like a pretty interesting way to get these shots without disturbing the animals.
Yeah. So Jahawi, as well as dairy-free milk alternatives made from soy, almond, oat, and even pea, there's a new substitute on the market, and that is milk made from potatoes.
Really?
Yeah, that's right. The Swedish company that makes the milk is called Dug, and they say that this dairy-free milk alternative is a lot healthier and more sustainable.
Well, that sounds good, I guess.
The potato milk hit supermarket shelves this week, and I'm looking forward to trying it, but I guess for now, I'll have to stick to my favourite dairy-free alternative, which is oat milk.
Well, as you know, I'm not such a fan of the milk alternatives, so I'll just stick to my favourite, which is a nice cold beer. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Cheers.
Cheers.